Week 16 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units I would start this week. The first one, the Green Bay Packers. So this pack of defense has been a middle of the pack defense all season long, but coming off a great ball game week 15 at Seattle, and now a great ball game here Monday night versus the New Orleans Saints that give up the 12th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. They had great starts to the last few games for Green Bay. Week 12 versus San Francisco, 10 points allowed, 2 sacks, an interception, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 13 versus the Dolphins, 17 points allowed, 5 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 14, a down game, and rightfully so, with the Lions, 34 points allowed, a sack, an interception. In Week 15 at Seattle, 13 points allowed, 7 sacks, 2 interceptions. So this week with a great matchup versus Saints, a depleted offense, no Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara banged up. We don't know if he's going to play. Taysom Hill out for the season, Rashid Shaheed out for the season, Chris Olave going to be out once again and most likely out for the season. I think Green Bay, home game, Lambeau Field this late in the season, goes out there, has a great performance, and definitely a defense to put in the starting lineup. This week, the next DST, the Buffalo Bills. This Bill team, they've been playing great football over the last month of the season especially. I know they had a tough loss at the Rams in Week 14, but they rebounded with a big shootout victory, 48-42. at the Lions in Week 15. So the last few weeks, definitely tougher matchups, but this week, an easy matchup versus the Patriots. I give up the 7th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few games, Week 13 versus the Niners in that snow game, 10 points allowed, 2 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries. Week 14 at the Rams, 44 points allowed in that one. And Week 15 at Detroit, another tough game for the D, 42 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. So this week with a great matchup versus Drake May and this Patriot offense that's had trouble all season long putting points on the board, and he's been turnover prone at times as well. I think Buffalo this week goes out there. The defense gets off to a nice start. The offense gets off to an early start. We know this Patriot offense isn't built to play catch-up and move the football up and down the field. So I believe that's going to play into the Bills' hands, and their defense definitely a start this week. The next DSTs, the Indianapolis Colts, is a one-week streaming option. I like the matchup, obviously, versus the Tennessee Titans, an offense that struggled all season long. Will Levis turned the football over 4 times in last week's ball game, and we know he got benched in that game, so we'll see if it's Levis or Mason Rudolph this week. But either way, I think this Colt team is a streaming option, is a decent option this week. Week 12 versus Detroit, 24 points allowed, 3 sacks. Week 13 at the Pats, 24 points allowed, 4 sacks and interception. And Week 15, I thought they did an okay job at the Broncos, 25 points allowed, a sack, 3 interceptions. So like I said, this week, great matchup versus Tennessee. Not much on the offense besides Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, only 2 big options in that offense. But they get to the quarterback at times, and they create a few turnovers. So I think Indianapolis this week is fine as a start. The next start, the Arizona Cardinals. So the Cardinals, they've been a decent unit for the majority of the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season here is Arizona. And this week, another great matchup at the Panthers that give up the 10th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. Week 13 at Minnesota, 23 points allowed, 5 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 14 versus the Seahawks, tough ball game, 30 points allowed. And Week 15 versus New England, 17 points allowed, 2 sacks and interception. So like I said, Week 16, a great matchup at the Panthers. I know Bryce Young, he's definitely looked better over the last month of the season since he came back in to the starting lineup for Andy Dalton. But this team, they don't have many weapons. Chuba Hubbard, obviously, he's been great all season long at the running back. Xavier Legette, he's banged up with his groin injury week to week right now. And that leaves Adam Thielen and Jalen Colker at the wide receiver position. So I think this Arizona DST could travel well into Carolina and have a good game this week. And the final defense DST I'm starting is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs, they got a pretty decent matchup going to the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. And this Buc team, their offense has been getting off to good starts over the last month of the season here. Now winning 4 in a row after they were banged up. Mike Evans, he was out for a while. Chris Godwin, obviously he's been out for the season now and he's been out a while. But this Buc team, they've turned it around and got things going. And this week, a great matchup at the Cowboys. They give up the 5th most points to DSTs on the season. So right now, this Tampa Bay Buc team, I think, could go out there, get to an early lead. And this Cowboy team, we've seen it this season, especially when Cooper Rush has been a quarterback. They don't play catch-up well. Week 12 at the Giants, 7 points allowed, 4 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 13 at Carolina, 23 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery. Week 14 versus the Raiders, 13 points allowed, 2 sacks, an INT, a fumble recovery. And last week versus a pretty good offense of the Chargers in Los Angeles. 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, an interception, a fumble recovery. So they're creating turnovers. They're getting to the quarterback. And I know Cooper Rush, he's definitely played good football over the last 3 weeks of the season for this Cowboy team. But like I said, if Tampa Bay gets off to a 10, 14-point lead and the Cowboys got to play catch-up, that's where their offense has definitely been a problem and turn the football over for them when they're one-dimensional or rush your quarterback this season. So I think Tampa Bay is a decent start this week. So that's a few defense DST units I would start for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.